to make a national plea to see if anyone has seen her car or has any information.
The story of Loretta Saunders is a haunting reminder of how one act of violence can ripple across families.
And like she locked herself off banking, online banking, and like she needed money. It's like
Communities and even entire nations. It is not only a tragic murder case, but also a symbol of a larger crisis that has been overlooked for far too long. Loretta was young, intelligent, and full of ambition, with a future that seemed boundless. Yet her life was cut short in a brutal crime that shocked Canada and drew attention to an issue that too many tried to ignore: the staggering number of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Loretta Saunders was born in Newfoundland and Labrador, part of the Inuit community. From an early age, she displayed an incredible determination to pursue education and create a better future for herself and her family. She later moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where she enrolled at St. Mary's University. Loretta was not just another student, she was deeply invested in her studies. She was writing her thesis on the very subject of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, a crisis that had devastated countless families. It was an issue close to her heart, and tragically, it would soon consume her life in ways she could never have imagined. By 2014, Loretta had built a promising future. She was pursuing her degree in sociology, renting an apartment, and managing the responsibilities of adulthood while still focusing on her studies. To help cover expenses, she sublet one of her apartment rooms to a couple, Leggette and Victoria Henneberry. At first, it seemed like a straightforward arrangement, but beneath the surface, this couple was struggling with financial difficulties, instability, and a darker side that would soon emerge with horrifying consequences. On February 13, 2014, Loretta was reported missing after her family could not reach her. Friends and loved ones grew concerned immediately. It was unlike her to vanish without explanation. Police began their investigation, focusing on her apartment, which quickly revealed troubling signs. Her car, a blue Toyota, was also missing. Detectives knew they were dealing with more than just a disappearance. Something sinister was unfolding. As investigators dug deeper, suspicion quickly fell on Leggette and Victoria Henneberry, the couple renting her apartment. They had been seen driving her car and behaving suspiciously in the days following Loretta's disappearance. Police tracked them down in Ontario, hundreds of miles away, where they were arrested after a tense pursuit. The story they revealed was chilling. According to confessions later made in court, Leggette and Henneberry had been plotting a robbery. They were desperate for money and decided to target their landlord, Loretta. On February 13, when she returned home, they ambushed her. Leggette admitted to strangling Loretta, while Henneberry assisted. The young woman, who had been studying the epidemic of violence against Indigenous women, had herself become its victim. The murder sent shockwaves across Canada. Loretta was only 26 years old. She had been on the verge of completing her thesis, a project meant to shed light on systemic failures and demand justice for missing Indigenous women. Her death turned her into one more statistic in a crisis she was passionately working to expose. The cruel irony was unbearable for her family, her professors, and the wider community. But this was not only a personal tragedy. Loretta's murder became a turning point in national conversations. Advocates, leaders, and families of other victims seized the moment to highlight the urgent need for a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. For too long, the issue had been sidelined, with authorities offering limited acknowledgement and action. Loretta's case was impossible to ignore, not only because of its brutality, but also because of who she was, a student striving to bring justice to others before injustice consumed her. The trial of Leggette and Victoria Henneberry revealed the disturbing details of their crime. They initially tried to deny responsibility, but the evidence was overwhelming. Loretta's body was discovered in New Brunswick, left in a wooded area near the Trans-Canada Highway. The discovery devastated her family, but also provided closure after days of agonizing uncertainty. The court proceedings were harrowing, but they ended with convictions. Leggette received a life sentence without parole eligibility for 25 years, while Henneberry was sentenced to life with parole eligibility after 10 years. Yet for many, the legal outcome was not enough. The greater injustice lay in the fact that Loretta's death was not an isolated case. Across Canada, Indigenous women and girls were disappearing or being murdered at rates far higher than non-Indigenous women. Reports showed they were up to 7 times more likely to be victims of homicide. The reasons were deeply rooted in systemic racism, poverty, marginalization, and the failure of institutions to act. Loretta's murder made it impossible for the public to continue looking away. Her story became a rallying cry. Vigils were held across the country, honoring her memory and demanding justice for all Indigenous women. Her professors and classmates at St. Mary's University ensured her thesis project would not be forgotten. Her family spoke out courageously, channeling their grief into advocacy. They reminded the world that Loretta was not just a victim, she was a daughter, a sister, and a brilliant young woman with dreams that deserved to be realized. This is where the tragedy deepens. The fact that Loretta's murder gained widespread media attention was in part because of her university background and her connection to the very issue she was studying. But thousands of other Indigenous women did not receive the same attention. Their disappearances were often dismissed or minimized, their names never making headlines. Loretta's death became a symbol of that imbalance, a reminder that justice must be equal and that every life deserves recognition. By 2015, just a year after her murder, the national conversation had shifted. The Canadian government faced mounting pressure to launch a full-scale inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. Loretta's case was cited repeatedly as evidence of why such an inquiry was long overdue. Activists argued that her death highlighted systemic failures in housing, policing, and social services that left Indigenous women vulnerable. The footprints of her story echoed far beyond Halifax, shaping policy and sparking activism that continues to this day. The tragedy of Loretta Saunders is also a story about resilience. Her family refused to let her memory fade into silence. They fought to keep her story alive, to ensure that she was remembered not only as a victim, but also as a young scholar and advocate whose work was cut short. They kept pressing the government, the justice system, and society to do better. Every time her name was spoken at rallies or vigils, it became a reminder that her murder was not in vain if it could bring change. In reflecting on this case, one cannot escape the painful irony. Loretta's life work was centered on documenting the violence inflicted upon Indigenous women. She hoped to shine a light on the injustice so that solutions could be found. But instead, her own murder became the evidence she had been collecting. It was proof of the crisis, carved into reality with devastating clarity. Years later, as documentaries, articles, and reports continue to cover her story, Loretta's legacy remains strong. She is remembered not only for the horror of her death, but also for the promise of her life. Her story continues to be told in classrooms, at vigils, and in government hearings. She has become part of a larger tapestry of voices demanding change, a movement that insists no woman should be forgotten and no family should be left without answers. The murder of Loretta Saunders is a reminder that behind every statistic lies a person. Behind every report of a missing woman